I destroyed my bully's promotion after he tried to take credit for my project. Before we begin the story, make sure to subscribe to our channel and never miss more incredible stories every day. Marcus smiled at the executives, completely unaware that his next slide would end his career. He stood at the front of the glass-walled boardroom, his tailored suit immaculate, his teeth practically gleaming under the recessed lighting. He was pitching a multi-million-dollar data optimization initiative to VP Hastings, the most terrifying and results-driven executive in our division. Hastings leaned forward, steepling his fingers, clearly impressed by the slick graphics and the confident baritone of Marcus's voice. I sat silently in the back corner of the room, blending into the shadows by the IT support rack. I am Alex. I'm a 28-year-old data analyst, the kind of guy who lives in cramped cubicles, writes complex scripts, and does the heavy lifting while the guys in the corner offices take all the glory. For 3 years, Marcus had made my life an absolute living hell. He was 34, technically incompetent, but a master of corporate politics. He knew exactly whose hand to shake, whose jokes to laugh at, and whose work to steal. He was a bully who operated with a smile, tossing me extra assignments late on Friday afternoons and subtly threatening my job security if I didn't comply. But this project was different. It wasn't just some spreadsheet. I had spent 8 grueling months coding an entirely new predictive algorithm that would save the company over $4 million annually. It was my masterpiece. It was supposed to be my ticket out of the cubicle farm and into a senior role. Instead, Marcus swooped in, used his golfing relationship with a clueless director, and hijacked the entire thing. He rebranded my code, slapped his name on the cover page, and was currently using it to secure a massive vice president promotion. Have you ever watched someone dig their own grave and hand you the shovel? That's exactly what I was doing right now. I didn't go to HR. I didn't throw a temper tantrum. I just sat in the back of the room, my fingers hovering over a hidden kill switch on my laptop. I had told him the data needed one final review, but his arrogance blinded him. He wanted the promotion today. He wanted the glory right now. And as he paced across the expensive carpet, soaking in the admiration of the C-suite, I felt my heart pounding against my ribs. He pointed the remote toward the screen, completely unaware of the absolute devastation awaiting him. To understand how we ended up in that boardroom, you have to understand the daily grind under Marcus. When I first joined the firm 3 years ago, I was eager, introverted, and incredibly naive. Marcus was my direct supervisor. He wore $400 shoes, had perfect hair, and possessed an uncanny ability to sound like a genius while saying absolutely nothing of substance. My very first week, I built an automated reporting tool that saved our team 10 hours a week. Marcus casually presented it at the Friday stand-up as an efficiency protocol he'd been developing. I sat there, stunned, while the rest of the team clapped. That became the pattern. If a project was late, it was my fault. If a project was flawless, it was his brilliant leadership. He would catch me in the break room, clap me hard on the shoulder, and say things like, "We make a great team, Alex. You keep your head down in the spreadsheets, and I'll keep the executives happy." It was patronizing, but I swallowed my pride because I needed the paycheck to clear my student loans. The constant theft of my work chipped away at my soul. Sarah, a senior analyst and the only person in the office who saw through Marcus's slick veneer, tried to warn me. "He's a parasite, Alex," she whispered to me one afternoon by the coffee machine. "He feeds on people who are too polite to scream." I knew she was right, but I didn't want to scream. I wanted to prove myself undeniably. So, I started working late. I stayed after the office emptied out, burying myself in a massive, secret project. I was going to build an optimization matrix that didn't just save time, but actually identified hidden revenue streams in our client portfolios. It was complex, heavy-lifting analytical work that Marcus couldn't even begin to comprehend. I poured 6 months of my life into that code, working nights and weekends. I was determined to bypass Marcus entirely and take this straight to the higher-ups to finally secure the respect I deserved. I was completely exhausted, but I was so close to finishing the one thing that could change my career. I just needed one more week to finalize the code, but I made a fatal mistake. The project became my absolute obsession. I called it the golden goose in my private files, because the preliminary simulations showed it could easily boost our quarterly margins by at least 12%. It was flawless. The algorithms were running smoothly, the predictive models were holding up under stress tests, and the user interface I built was idiot-proof. I had spent countless nights double-checking every single line of code, ensuring that when I finally presented it, there would be no room for doubt or criticism. I was finally ready. It was a Tuesday afternoon, and the office was buzzing with the usual chaotic energy. VP Hastings had just sent out an intimidating company-wide email demanding innovative solutions for the upcoming fiscal year. This was my moment. I compiled the final data visualization dashboard, grinning at the screen. For the first time in years, I felt a genuine sense of pride in my corporate existence. But then, nature called. I had been drinking coffee for 5 hours straight and desperately needed to use the restroom. In my exhaustion and excitement, I broke the cardinal rule of our cutthroat office environment. I got up from my cramped cubicle and walked away without locking my computer screen. I was only gone for maybe 90 seconds. When I returned, my heart dropped into my stomach. Marcus was leaning over my desk, his hand resting casually on my mouse. He was scrolling through the executive summary of the Golden Goose, his eyes wide with a predatory gleam. "Interesting side hustle you've got here, Alex," he murmured, not even bothering to look up at me. I tried to push him away, stammering that it was a private file, just a rough draft of an independent study. But Marcus wasn't listening. He had already recognized the magnitude of what I had built. He saw the projected revenue numbers. He saw the flawless data integration. He saw his own ticket to the C-suite. He slowly straightened up, gave me that sickening, charismatic smile, and patted my shoulder with heavy condescension. "This is exactly what our department needs," he said smoothly. He walked away, leaving me staring at my screen in absolute frozen horror. I desperately tried to lock the file, but he had already emailed a copy to himself. The very next morning, the corporate theft was finalized before I even had a chance to drink my coffee. I walked into the office to find an urgent calendar invite from VP Hastings. The subject line read, "Marcus's Revenue Initiative Strategy Alignment." My stomach twisted into tight, painful knots. I rushed to the main conference room, where Marcus was already holding court. He had printed glossy, spiral-bound copies of my executive summary, with his name boldly stamped on the cover. He was pitching my project as his own personal brainchild to the VP. "I've been tinkering with this architecture for months," Marcus lied effortlessly, gesturing to the complex charts I had painstakingly designed. Hastings, a man who usually terrified middle management, looked genuinely impressed. "This is brilliant, Marcus. Exactly the kind of aggressive innovation I asked for." I tried to speak up. I opened my mouth to explain that the architecture was mine, that the scripts were sitting on my local drive. But Marcus smoothly cut me off before I could utter a single syllable. "And of course," Marcus said, turning to me with a magnanimous smile, "I couldn't bring this vision to life without my trusty assistant, Alex. I'm going to need him to handle the tedious data entry while I drive the high-level strategy." Hastings nodded approvingly. "Good. Be a team player, Alex. Assist Marcus however he needs. If this launches successfully, Marcus, that VP spot is yours." I was publicly sidelined in less than 5 minutes. I was told to assist in the execution of my own masterpiece. The sheer audacity of the heist left me completely speechless. Marcus had outmaneuvered me with ruthless efficiency, using his established political capital to instantly legitimize his claim to my labor. As the meeting adjourned, Hastings shook Marcus's hand firmly. Marcus shot me a quick, victorious wink as the executive walked out of the room. He had stolen my work, secured his promotion track, and relegated me to a secretary. I walked back to my cramped cubicle, my hands shaking with pure, unadulterated fury. I sat at my desk, staring blankly at the screen, plotting my revenge against him. The anger burned inside me like a physical fire. It wasn't just the loss of the promotion. It was the absolute humiliation of being told to be a team player by the man who had just robbed me blind. Over the next 2 weeks, Marcus paraded around the office like a conquering hero. He was officially fast-tracked for the vice president role, schmoozing with the C-suite, and taking long lunches while I was trapped at my desk, forced to write regular progress reports on my own stolen project. Sarah noticed my dark mood immediately. One afternoon, she cornered me in the tense, fluorescent-lit break room while I was aggressively stirring a cup of terrible instant coffee. "I know what he did," she said quietly. leaning against the counter. Everyone with half a brain knows Marcus can't code his way out of a paper bag. That algorithm has your fingerprints all over it. I looked at her, my jaw tight. Then why won't anyone say anything? Why does he get away with it? Sarah sighed, a tired, cynical sound. Because he plays the game, Alex. Hastings doesn't care who actually wrote the code. He only cares about the presentation, the optics, and the bottom line. Marcus delivers the optics. If you go to HR now, it's your word against a rising star. They will crush you. I knew she was right. Corporate HR exists to protect the company, not the employees. If I complained without bulletproof evidence, I would be labeled as a bitter, jealous junior analyst and quietly managed out of the firm. I felt incredibly isolated, trapped in a system designed to reward sociopathic charm over actual competence. Sarah patted my arm sympathetically. Don't fight a losing battle, Alex. Just update your resume and get out of here. It's not worth your mental health. I smiled at her, thanking her for the advice, but inside, a cold, calculating resolve was solidifying. I wasn't going to update my resume. I wasn't going to run away and let him win. I was going to stay right here, bide my time, and gather the ammunition I needed. I just needed to find the one weak point that would shatter his entire facade. The first crack in Marcus's armor appeared a few days later. Because he had bypassed the actual creation of the algorithm, he possessed absolutely no understanding of its foundational mechanics. He had memorized my high-level summary, but the underlying mathematics were practically an alien language to him. I was sitting in my cubicle when he sauntered over, holding a printed page of the code I had written. His usual swagger was slightly muted, replaced by a tight, strained expression. "Hey, buddy," he said, using that sickeningly familiar tone. Hastings wants a quick breakdown of how the predictive modeling weights the seasonal market fluctuations. Just give me the elevator pitch so I can dumb it down for him. He slid the paper onto my desk. I looked at the code block. It wasn't the seasonal fluctuation matrix. It was the error handling protocol. He couldn't even identify the correct part of the script. That's the error handling loop, Marcus, I said evenly, watching his eyes widen for a fraction of a second before he recovered his composure. Right? Just testing you, he chuckled nervously. But seriously, write me a cheat sheet on the seasonal weights. Keep it simple. He walked away far too quickly. That was the moment the light bulb went off in my head. He was flying blind. He was about to present a highly complex, dynamic system to a room full of aggressive executives, and he didn't know how the engine worked. This sparked a sudden, intense curiosity. If he was this utterly clueless about my project, how had he managed to build a supposedly stellar reputation over the last 5 years? I realized I had been looking at this entirely wrong. I shouldn't just be trying to prove he stole from me. I needed to look at his entire history. I waited until the office emptied out at 7 o'clock. My heart thudding against my ribs, I logged into the company's internal server architecture. I had administrative access because of my analytical role, something Marcus had completely forgotten. I typed in his employee ID and began digging through 5 years of digital archives. The breadcrumb trail I found in the system logs was absolutely staggering. I used my administrative access to pull up the version histories, timestamped emails, and project access records for every major initiative Marcus had supposedly led since he joined the company. A horrifyingly clear pattern emerged within the first hour of digging. Every single time Marcus got a promotion or a massive bonus, it was immediately preceded by the sudden resignation or firing of a junior analyst. I cross-referenced the dates. 3 years ago, a brilliant quiet woman named Chloe built a risk assessment tool. Marcus took the credit. Chloe was fired for culture fit 2 months later. 2 years ago, a guy named David designed a client retention database. Marcus presented it to the board. David quietly resigned the next week. It was a career built entirely on the backs of exploited, disposable juniors. I felt sick to my stomach as I downloaded the server access logs. The digital forensics were undeniable. The timestamps proved that Marcus rarely opened a project file until after it was 90% completed by someone else. He was a corporate parasite, moving from host to host, sucking them dry and discarding them. But proving plagiarism is notoriously difficult in corporate environments, especially when the bully has executive backing. I needed more than just a pattern of behavior. I needed a smoking gun that VP Hastings couldn't possibly ignore or sweep under the rug. I shifted my focus back to my own project, the Golden Goose. I started comparing my original, hidden backup files with the version Marcus was currently storing on the shared executive drive. I wanted to see exactly how he was prepping for his big VP presentation. I opened his master file, preparing to simply document his stolen presentation slides and save the evidence. But as I scrolled through his altered data models, my blood ran completely cold. He hadn't just changed the fonts and the color schemes to match his aesthetic. He had actually gone into the system and touched the core analytical code. I stared at the screen, realizing his arrogance was about to destroy the entire company. The mini twist was so shocking I had to run the calculations 3 times to believe my own eyes. In his desperate attempt to make the pitch look even more impressive to the executives, Marcus had altered my foundational algorithms. He had gone into the projected revenue variables and manually inflated the numbers. He wanted to promise Hastings 20% growth instead of the realistic 12% my code had accurately predicted. But because Marcus was technically illiterate, he didn't understand how the variables interacted with the risk assessment modules. By forcing the algorithm to display a higher potential profit, he had completely broken the safety constraints. He had created a catastrophic, fatal flaw in the system. If the company actually launched this altered version of the software, it would aggressively over-leverage our client accounts during a market downturn. It wouldn't just fail to make money. It would actively drain millions of dollars from our core portfolios within the first quarter. He had essentially built a financial time bomb and slapped his own name on it. I sat in the dim light of my cubicle, trembling with a mix of horror and profound realization. I finally had him. This wasn't just about stolen credit anymore. This was about corporate negligence on a massive scale. If I went to HR now, they might just quietly fix the code and give Marcus a slap on the wrist to save face. I couldn't let that happen. He needed to be exposed publicly, fundamentally, and irreversibly. I realized that Hastings, a man who worshipped data and despised incompetence, would absolutely tear Marcus apart if he saw this flaw. But Marcus was planning to present a sanitized, highly curated slideshow that hid all the underlying math. The executives would only see the fake, inflated revenue graphs. I needed to find a way to strip away his glossy presentation and force the raw, corrupted data onto the screen during the most important meeting of his life. I closed the server connection and began drafting the most dangerous plan of my career. Instead of going to HR with zero proof or screaming about the stolen project, I decided to play along. The next morning, I walked up to Marcus's desk, plastered a fake, subservient smile on my face, and offered to help him prep for the final executive presentation. I know how busy you are with the high-level strategy, I told him, keeping my voice perfectly steady. Let me format the final slide deck and link the live data feeds for the boardroom projector. It'll save you time. Marcus leaned back in his expensive chair, lacing his fingers together. He looked at me with smug satisfaction, clearly believing he had completely broken my spirit. Good man, Alex. I knew you'd eventually understand the value of being a team player. Have the deck ready by Thursday. He handed me the keys to his own destruction. Over the next 3 days, I worked meticulously. I built his presentation exactly as he wanted it, glossy, superficial, and full of his inflated, fraudulent numbers. But underneath the sleek surface of the PowerPoint, I embedded a hidden data trap. I wrote a custom, heavily encrypted macro script that tied directly into the live, corrupted version of the algorithm he had altered. I mapped this macro to a specific keyboard shortcut. During a normal presentation, the slides would look perfectly fine. But if a specific key was pressed, the macro would instantly override the presentation software, strip away the sanitized charts, and project the raw version histories, the catastrophic error margins, and the specific lines of code Marcus had manually tampered with. It would show his login credentials attached to every single fatal alteration. I tested the trap 50 times in the safety of my apartment. It executed flawlessly every single time. It was a digital guillotine, perfectly sharpened and waiting for the right moment to drop. I packed up my laptop on Wednesday night, feeling a terrifying adrenaline rush. Everything was perfectly in place until Marcus unexpectedly demanded access to my secure hard drive. The close call happened at 8 a.m. on the day of the final VP pitch. I was sitting at my desk, mentally rehearsing the sequence of events, when Marcus suddenly appeared over my shoulder. He looked incredibly pale, his usual swagger entirely absent. He was sweating through his expensive tailored shirt. Paranoia had finally set in. He knew he was flying blind, and the immense stress of presenting stolen, complex data to VP Hastings was clearly eating him alive. "Alex," he snapped, his voice tight with anxiety. "I need your local hard drives. Now. I want all the foundational code moved onto my personal encrypted USB. We are wiping your machine immediately." My blood ran completely cold. If he wiped my machine, he would destroy the original, functional version of the project, leaving only his corrupted time bomb on the server. More importantly, he might discover the hidden macro script I had built into the final presentation file. "Marcus, the executive presentation starts in exactly 2 hours," I stammered, desperately trying to stall him. "The deep file transfers will take too long, and I still need to calibrate the projector in the boardroom." "I don't care," he hissed, slamming his hand down on my desk. "This is my project. I don't want any loose ends. Hand over the drives." I felt a massive spike of panic. I looked around, desperately seeking an out. Sarah was watching from the break room, her eyes wide with concern. I took a deep, steadying breath, forcing my hands to stop shaking. "Okay, Marcus, but you need to authorize the security wipe with IT first. Company policy for external storage transfers. You know Hastings heavily tracks compliance." I bluffed perfectly. Marcus hesitated, knowing that opening an IT ticket right before the pitch would look incredibly suspicious. He cursed under his breath, glancing frantically at the wall clock. "Fine. Just make sure the boardroom projector works. I'll deal with your drives this afternoon." He stormed off toward the washroom to splash water on his face. I slumped back in my chair, barely able to breathe. I had survived the morning, but now I had to execute the final, terrifying trap. The setup for the ultimate showdown began at precisely 9:45 a.m. The executive boardroom was a sleek, intimidating glass box overlooking the city skyline. I arrived early to set up the laptop, double-checking the connection to the massive overhead projector. I ran a silent test of the macro shortcut. The digital trap was armed and ready. At 9:50 a.m., Marcus strolled in. He had regained his composure, his hair perfectly styled, carrying a leather portfolio that held exactly 0 useful information. When he saw me sitting by the IT support rack at the back of the room, his eyes narrowed into angry slits. "What are you doing here, Alex? I told you to stay at your desk. I am presenting this solo." He was trying to ban me from the room so there would be no witnesses to his fraudulent triumph. I stood up, adjusting my glasses. VP Hastings requested mandatory technical support for all live data presentations. I lied smoothly. Sarah just confirmed it from the front desk. If the live feed crashes, Hastings will want someone here to fix it instantly. Marcus gritted his teeth, knowing he couldn't argue with a supposed directive from the vice president. Before he could kick me out, the heavy glass doors swung open. VP Hastings walked in, flanked by 3 other senior executives. The room instantly fell dead silent. Hastings took his seat at the head of the long mahogany table, opening his notebook with a sharp, authoritative snap. "All right, Marcus," Hastings rumbled, his piercing gaze locking onto the terrified bully. "You've been promising me a revolution in our data optimization. Show me why I should give you this vice president title." Marcus swallowed hard, pasting on his brilliant, charismatic smile. "Absolutely, sir. Prepare to be amazed." He grabbed the presentation remote and clicked to the title slide. The Marcus Optimization Initiative. I sat back in the shadows, my heart hammering violently against my ribs. I placed my fingers very carefully over the laptop keyboard. I waited patiently for the exact moment his towering arrogance would blind him to reality. The trap springs at the exact moment Marcus thinks he has won. For the first 15 minutes of the presentation, Marcus is absolutely in his element. He clicks through the glossy slides, relying on his charisma and empty corporate buzzwords to dazzle the executives. He talks about synergy, dynamic growth, and paradigm shifts, carefully avoiding any actual technical details. VP Hastings is nodding along, clearly seduced by the artificially inflated revenue projections showing a massive 20% profit margin. Marcus shoots a smug, victorious glare in my direction, silently mocking me from across the room. He thinks he has pulled off the heist of the century. But then it happens. Hastings raises his hand, abruptly halting the presentation. The room falls deadly silent. Marcus, Hastings says, his voice low and highly analytical. These projected profit margins are incredible, but I need to understand the risk mitigation. Explain to me, specifically, how the algorithm weights the seasonal market downturns against our leveraged assets in the third quarter. It is the exact foundational question Marcus had asked me in the break room days ago. Marcus freezes. The color drains completely from his face. He opens his mouth, but no words come out. He stammers, "Well, sir, the algorithm uses a proprietary, dynamic loop." Hastings frowns, his eyes narrowing sharply. "That doesn't mean anything, Marcus. Show me the underlying data models. Show me the actual math." Marcus panics. He starts clicking the remote frantically, trying to skip to a generic summary slide. "The math is highly complex, sir. I didn't want to bore you. That was my cue." From my hidden spot in the back corner of the room, I firmly pressed the custom keyboard shortcut. The hidden macro executed instantly. The massive projector screen flickered wildly, violently overriding Marcus's remote control. The glossy, sanitized charts vanished in a fraction of a second, completely replaced by a stark, black terminal window filled with raw, blazing red data. The executives gasped as the true, horrifying reality of the project was finally laid bare. The big reveal hit the boardroom like a physical shockwave. On the massive screen, my macro laid out everything in brutal, undeniable clarity. The display split into two columns. On the left was the original, stable algorithm I had built, clearly time-stamped and authorized under my employee ID. On the right was Marcus's corrupted version. The screen automatically highlighted the exact lines of code Marcus had manually altered to inflate the numbers. Below that, a massive, flashing warning box detailed the catastrophic error margin. It clearly stated that under a simulated third-quarter market downturn, the altered algorithm would trigger a cascading failure, costing the company an estimated $12 million in pure losses. But the macro didn't stop there. It pulled the system access logs and plastered them across the bottom of the screen. It showed, in indisputable digital black and white, that Marcus had spent exactly 0 hours developing the architecture and had only logged in to recklessly manipulate the final revenue variables just 3 days ago. VP Hastings stood up slowly, pushing his chair back. His face was a mask of absolute, terrifying fury. He stared at the screen, reading the catastrophic risk assessment, and then turned his dead eyes toward Marcus. $12 million, Hastings whispered, his voice shaking with rage. "You altered the foundational code to inflate your presentation, and you built a $12 million bomb." Marcus was trembling violently. He dropped the presentation remote, his eyes darting frantically around the room. He pointed a shaking finger at me. "He did it. Alex sabotaged the file. He's trying to frame me because he's jealous." But Hastings was no fool. He pointed directly at the glaring timestamp logs on the screen. "Your login credentials are attached to the code alterations, Marcus. You deliberately forged financial data to secure a promotion. You are entirely incompetent." The silence that followed was incredibly heavy, completely suffocating the once cocky bully. Marcus desperately tried to speak, but his entire corporate career was already reduced to ashes. The meltdown that followed was spectacular and deeply pathetic. Marcus, realizing he was entirely trapped by his own undeniable digital footprint, completely lost his mind. He started shouting, pacing erratically around the boardroom, desperately begging the executives to listen to reason. "I bring in the clients. I am the face of this department. You can't do this to me over a simple coding error," he yelled, his perfectly styled hair now a chaotic mess. VP Hastings didn't even blink. He reached over to the conference phone on the mahogany table and pressed a single button. "Security," Hastings said calmly into the speaker. "I need 2 guards in the main executive boardroom immediately. We have an employee who requires an immediate escort from the building." Marcus froze, the reality of the situation finally crashing down on his shoulders. The massive VP promotion was gone. His corporate reputation was utterly destroyed. He was being fired for gross negligence and data fraud in front of the most powerful people in the entire company. He looked at me, his eyes wide with a mix of pure hatred and utter disbelief. He couldn't comprehend how the quiet, invisible analyst he had bullied for years had orchestrated his absolute ruin. 2 large security guards entered the room, moving swiftly toward him. "Clear out your desk, Marcus," Hastings commanded, his voice devoid of any human emotion. "Legal will be in touch regarding the financial data you attempted to forge. Do not ever contact this firm again." As the guards physically escorted a sobbing, ruined Marcus out of the glass doors, Sarah walked past the hallway, shooting me a tiny, knowing smile. Hastings sighed heavily, rubbing his temples as he looked back at the projector screen. He turned to me, standing quietly by the IT rack. "Alex," Hastings said, his tone shifting from fury to intense curiosity. "You built the original, stable algorithm on the left, didn't you?" I stepped out of the shadows, looking the terrified executive directly in the eye. I nodded slowly, preparing to claim exactly what had been stolen from me for years. The reflection on what happened that day still brings a smile to my face. After Marcus was dragged out of the building, VP Hastings asked me to sit down. I spent the next 2 hours walking the C-suite through the actual, flawless mechanics of my original algorithm. I showed them exactly how it worked, how it mitigated risk, and how it would safely increase our profit margins by a solid 12%. Hastings was absolutely blown away by the depth of my work. By the end of the week, I wasn't just given the credit for the project. I was handed Marcus's corner office and the very promotion he had tried to steal. I became the youngest director of analytics in the company's history. Sarah was promoted to my senior lead, and together we rebuilt the department, ensuring that no junior analyst would ever have their work hijacked again. Marcus tried to sue the company for wrongful termination, but the sheer volume of digital evidence I had exposed in that boardroom caused his lawyers to drop him almost immediately. I heard through the industry grapevine that he is currently working a mid-level sales job at a struggling regional firm, completely blacklisted from any major corporate executive roles. Looking back, I learned a vital lesson about dealing with corporate narcissists. Bullies like Marcus rely entirely on your silence, your politeness, and your fear of making a scene. They thrive in the shadows of corporate politics, stealing the light from people who actually do the hard work. If you find yourself in a similar situation, my advice is simple. Do not confront them without ammunition. Protect your work, secure your digital footprints, and document absolutely everything. Never let anyone convince you to be a team player when the game is entirely rigged against you. Sometimes, justice isn't handed to you by HR. Sometimes, you have to build the trap yourself, sit back in the shadows, and simply wait for the bully to confidently press the wrong button.